Welcome everyone to Coin Bureau Clips and to another episode of Not Financial Advice Live, NFA Live. This is episode 12, if I'm not mistaken. I am, of course, joined by the wonderful Rob from Digital Asset News and Ben from Into the Cryptoverse. Welcome, gentlemen. Another week.
Hello.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Another eventful week.
To say the least. This is going to be a great show, I think. Like we just talked. Oh yeah.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about today. So, well, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Let's start with the Fed. Let's get the Fed out of the way, shall we? Let's bring the question up here. So, yesterday it was a 25 basis point raise, which was pretty much what most people, I think, were expecting by that point. Obviously, the likes of Goldman Sachs and everyone were predicting, well, not everyone, but the likes of Goldman Sachs and a few others were saying that they were going to pause, but they didn't. We saw the markets, crypto in particular, retrace a little bit, but not by all that much. So, just quickly, in your opinions, was this a good call from Jerome and Co? Did they really have any other choice? And yeah, where do we go from here? Ben, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, I think they made the right choice. I think it was a very difficult position for them to be in because, you know, you have this banking crisis sort of going on that is hopefully being resolved. And even Jerome Powell said that, you know, the changes in lending and sort of the credit market are likely, you could probably think of them as comparable to another interest rate hike, because it would likely have some type of lag on the on real GDP and thus the economy. But yeah, I think 25 basis points was the right call. I think zero would have really called into question their resolve in fighting inflation, especially because literally just like a week or two ago, Powell was even entertaining the idea of even increasing the rate hike, you know, back up to 50. That's when he gave his congressional testimony. So I don't think 50 would have been smart. I think that 25 was the right call. 50, I think, would have been too much for really the market to bear. And so I think 25 is a sweet spot. I think probably the better question is, well, how much higher are they going to go from here? My general expectation was always that they'd make it to 5%. Now that they're here at 5%, I don't really think they can go that much higher. I mean, one or two 25 basis point rate hikes at the most is what I would sort of expect. But I think there's a case to be made that they could already be done. And it would actually probably depend on you know, financial markets. I mean, I know they say they don't care, but I think they do. I mean, you know, if the S&P just falls off the cliff between now and May, I don't think they're going to raise, you know, by 25 basis points. But if you know, if we're above 4,000, and inflation is still somewhat hot, then I suppose they could come out with one or two more 25 basis point rate hikes. But I think it was the right decision. And then also note that, you know, they are continuing, you know, QT at the same pace that they were before. So rolling off assets from the balance sheet. So that's still ongoing. And you'll notice that in sort of the press release that the terminology changed a bit, right? They're, instead of saying we expect, you know, ongoing increases to the target, you know, to the rate, they're now saying that they may increase or they may tighten up the sort of the conditions, but the terminology has changed quite a bit, because I've read, like, you know, so many of them, and I just sort of noticed some of the first things up there. And so there is sort of a different stance, I think, that they're taking now. I mean, it's not a pivot back to QE, but it is potentially the terminal rate. And I think we need to consider that it will probably be difficult for them to go, you know, too much higher than where they are right now. 25 basis points or 50 basis points, I think, is the most that they're going to do. So now at the end of the day, I don't really think they had any other great option. But, you know, one of the journalists did ask if they considered just a pause at this meeting, and he did say that they did consider it. But again, they want to make sure that people are confident in their resolve to get inflation back down to 2%. And I think that's sort of the biggest thing right now in the market is still pricing in rate cuts. I believe, as early as July. Before the meeting, it was June that the market was pricing in rate cuts. When Powell came out and said we're not planning on doing any rate cuts at all this year, it then shifted it out one more month, right, to July. But the market is having a really difficult time believing Powell. And so I think the pain is just going to be how long does longer mean, right? When they say higher for longer, how long does that mean? Does it mean 6 months? Does it mean 12 months? And I think that'll probably be the next the next narrative that we talk about. And when is the true pivot back to quantitative easing?
Yeah. It's interesting you mention in particular there, Ben, a test of resolve, because I completely agree with you on that. It's like, we've been talking for ages how they were going to keep hiking rates. Something was going to break. Was it going to be the housing market? Was it going to be the jobs market? And it happened to be the banks, but you can make a good argument that the banks are very separate from that. And I think Powell was very careful in his speech, wasn't he, to separate. I think he sort of started off by separating the banking crisis from monetary policy, kind of drawing a distinction between those two. But yeah, I mean, this was a big test, wasn't it? And I guess if they'd kind of flapped and gone, oh God, okay, we'll pause, whoa, let's calm it all down, then again that their credibility would have been called into question. And it's like, well, are you still focused on fighting inflation or not? That's what you were claiming. Right. But Rob, what are your thoughts? Was 25 right? Did they have any other choice?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if they had any other choice. I mean, honestly, it was amazing to me that the 50 basis points were on the table. And then all of a sudden, it was like 23, 24% they thought it would happen. And then all of a sudden that went down to 0. And then we hit to 25 basis points. And that was the higher resolution. But then all of a sudden there was this one where it said, just pause. So I just thought to myself, I'm like, gosh, if they pause, what would the market in the near term, it would rally up pretty high. So for my daily buys, I just thought to myself, well, if they do it, which I don't think they will, I'll just hold off a little bit and wait for them to make the announcement and see what happens. And they, I think they did what they had to do. And just like Ben talked about, there's still quantitative tightening, even though I think they added a little bit to their balance sheet not too long ago. So if they can keep these rates, even if they don't cut, let's say they don't cut for the rest of the year, but they keep tightening, that is in itself a way to fight inflation, correct? So if they can just do the tightening and just say, well, we'll just go for higher for longer for the rates and just keep them stagnant, they'll be the same thing. And hopefully we can get down to, I don't know, 2.5 or 3%. And I think there's just one more thing. They just did shift their some of their metrics. They wanted to have unemployment rate at, I think they wanted it somewhere around 4.5, and they said, well, we'll just go to a little bit higher, 4.6, 4.7, somewhere around there. So they're understanding that lagging indicator, they're going to have to lose a little bit to gain a little bit. So I think, they did the right thing for now. Let's see how long it lasts.
Yeah. I think it's worth as well drawing a bit of, giving some context beyond just America, of course. I noticed in particular there was something that really caught my eye earlier this week was that inflation in the UK had jumped again. It's now 10.4%, so still over 10%. And then we had the Bank of England just a couple of hours ago hiked rates by 25 basis points. Obviously, the European Central Bank raised by 50 last week. Someone just pointed out to me as well. Obviously, in the context of this of the whole Credit Suisse business, because obviously it's not just American banks that are failing. We saw Credit Suisse in trouble as well and have to be bailed out by UBS. And someone pointed out to me that even the Swiss National Bank raised by 50 basis points yesterday. And they've just seen one of their what you could argue as being one of their sort of systemically important banks almost go to the wall, and they're still raising by even more than the Fed is. So I guess what that tells us is that, as if it wasn't obvious, that inflation is still the 800-pound gorilla just kind of sitting in the corner of the room that you just ignore at your peril.
Yeah. I was taking a look at, there's a website I always look at, Trueflation. It uses Chainlink as an oracle to pull in outside data. And I feel you guys. And for the UK, you guys were up almost 20% for the inflation rate not too long ago. And now you're at a whopping low of like 16, somewhere around there. Of course, the data is different, depending on which government agency you get it from. But in America, we're sitting around 5%. So I can only imagine what it's like over there for goods and services, inflation being that high. That's tough. That's unsustainable.
Yeah. It's grim in the UK. I mean, I haven't been there since Christmas, but you really kind of noticed it. And yeah, it's this funny thing because I still keep up with the UK news sort of religiously, even though I don't live there anymore. And yeah, it's so many, all these sorts of stories about how just everyone is being squeezed. And yeah, inflation just that has to be got under control, I think. Sure. Banking crisis or no banking crisis. Okay, let's move on then. Let's go on to the next topic. This was I thought we'd have a little thought experiment for this one, and just imagine if we could stomach such a thing, a world without crypto. So let's assume we're having this banking crisis now, in an alternate reality where crypto did not exist. Where would you guys invest? How would you protect your wealth? Would such a world even be worth living in without crypto? Rob, where would you go with that?
Yeah, I think it really depends on just how bad the economy actually is. Like if we're talking about like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome type of thing, like of course it'd be like weapons and shelter and food and that type of thing. But if it's just like a general run-of-the-mill type of banking crisis, 2008, that type of situation, I got to tell you, I know here in the crypto sphere, in the crypto world, in the cryptoverse, and we're always talking about how great crypto and digital assets are. And we don't give enough credit to the gold and silver bugs that are out there. Like, I don't understand why we fight amongst each other because we want the same thing. I just don't get where the animosity comes from. So me personally, if it wasn't for crypto digital assets, it would be a lot more. I own some gold and silver. It would be a lot more gold and silver. And then of course it would be real estate. And then the big thing that I would do, the big thing that I would put my money into would be my own businesses. Because anytime you can put money into your own business that will generate income, either whether that be passive, recurring, or active, that's usually a better ROI than some of your investments will do. So if you believe in yourself and believe in the company that you started and are doing or want to start a company, that's where I would put a big amount of my funds into and to see how I could grow that. So, but it would always be diversified, right? It would be gold, silver, a little bit of stocks, a little bit of real estate, long-term, short-term rentals, and the businesses that I start. I think that's a pretty good recipe. Although it's not financial advice, but that's where I would do.
Yeah. It's I hear you when you say, yeah, it seems so crazy that there is all this animosity between gold bugs and Bitcoin. It seems to be sort of Peter Schiff represents the entire gold community, if you like. And
sorry, go ahead, guy.
No, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say like that guy you just mentioned. I don't really know him, but the people that you really should pay attention to are like Mike Maloney. Like that guy's great, and he's done a great series on gold and silver, and he talks about, and he also talks about how there's a place for Bitcoin. Schiff, sure, but he's just if you take a look at a lot of things he said, he talks about gold like it's the end all be all, but the majority of his wealth is in stocks. So who's really telling the full tale there?
Very true. Very true. Ben, what about you? What would your alternative assets be in a non-crypto world?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys pretty much covered it. But I mean, there's a sort of a saying, right? Like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So like, if gold is sort of the enemy of sort of the fiat banking system, then that means that they're our friend, right? I think that, if all of us had been born 50 years ago, we would have been more into that, that gold, silver community. and we would be the ones sort of like, not as on board maybe with crypto. Just like in 50 years from now, like we might be super pro, crypto, and maybe there's going to be some new asset class that we just sort of dismiss and don't think about. But yeah, I mean, I already do have positions in some precious metals like gold, silver, uranium. Is in my nuclear engineering background. I've got to have some positions in that kind of stuff. But like right now, at least in crypto, I primarily just have Bitcoin. Like I'm not really that interested in anything else in crypto at the moment. I think that'll change probably in about like 6 to 9 months. But I think like if I have more in Bitcoin than I do in precious metals, but obviously if crypto didn't exist at all, then I think the precious metal, component of my portfolio would be a lot higher. It's like, like it really has been a really low, like single digit percentage of my portfolio for for a long time. But if crypto weren't really an option, then I think my investment into precious metals would probably be like in the double digits in terms of like percent of my portfolio. I mean, even then, I think I would still have more in equities in general. Maybe I would be more interested in the real estate market. That's something I've wanted to get into for a while, and I'm thinking maybe of getting into it in like in 2 to 3 years. It seems like could be a good time to get in the real estate market.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would probably just say echo the sentiment that Rob already said is precious metals would be a good place to be, I think, in if crypto didn't exist. And I still think it's a good place to be even now, even with crypto existing. I mean, I think having some type of diversification in your portfolio is a good thing. And as crypto fanatics, we've often dismissed precious metals mainly because they haven't really done anything for the last 10 years. Like if you look at gold, it's essentially the same price as it was like, more than a decade ago.
Yeah.
But then you could also say, well, I mean, I know Bitcoin's up to, to 27, 28K right now, but just a few weeks ago, Bitcoin was lower than where it was at the end of 2017. And I mean, you're talking about 6 years later, it's the same price, right? So it's not, I think we fool ourselves into thinking that it's a completely different type of price structure. I think crypto moves quicker than precious metals, but it's not really that dissimilar when you think about the fact that Bitcoin was at the same price that it was, 6 years before. Gold was at the same price that it was at like, 12 years before. So it was a bit longer, but you could also, if you look back in history, you can see that assets like gold and silver go through several year phases where they get rapidly capitalized. And I actually think that phase is probably coming up here. I mean, they move at a snail's pace, right? So they could still be sitting at the same prices in a year. But I think the 2020s in general will actually probably be quite kind to assets like gold and silver. So I would say, yeah, precious metals is, I think, the obvious answer to such a question.
Is there a particular way that either of you prefer to get sort of precious metals exposure? Do you prefer to buy the asset itself, or through an ETF, or even through, in the case of any metal, I guess, but through minor stocks or anything like that?
So for me, it's all in my Roth IRA right now, and I've done it that way. However, I'm going to go visit family at the end of April in Las Vegas. And my brother is a huge gold bug, and he's got a ton of, gold medallions and bullions and things, and he stores them in the bank. And I'm going to talk to him about how he exactly does that. Because if you talk to most of the gold bugs, they'll be like, it's just the same thing with like Bitcoin, right? Do you want paper Bitcoin, or do you want real Bitcoin that you actually possess? Or do you want this? Do you want that? It's just, you just take a look at that and you realize one of the downfalls of gold and silver. It's not that great as far as transportable, and it's just kind of stuck there. But that's how I would see it.
Yeah. In terms of, I'd share an interesting story my dad once told me in terms of kind of alternative assets. Because I mean, I'm very much with you guys as well when it comes to gold and precious metals and real estate as well. But my dad is one of the lessons he taught me about investing was he said, invest in what you know, in what you understand, and for him, that's always been wine. My dad knows his way around a wine cellar, and he says that some of the best investments he ever made were in cases of wine, which I thought was really interesting. I remember he said he bought a case of Chateau Latour or Chateau Lafite from sort of early in the 20th century, and sort of never saw it, and obviously never drank it, and then sold it at a very healthy profit many years later. But the lesson I always took from that was, if you understand it, then there's a case to be made for investing in it. It's when you're investing in stuff you really have no clue about. That, I think, is when you start to run the risk of being out of your depth.
Mm-hmm. I can see that. That's collectibles. That was I've seen like some of the returns on wine. There's a company that does that. They'll get you into wine like for different shares of wine, and then you can get into it and sell it and go off of there. But again, I don't really know anything much about wine, so I thought it'd be not a great choice.
Yeah. I'll tell you one that I have not firsthand experience of, but anecdotal experience from a good friend of mine. That one to avoid is horses. They're a good friend of mine owned a couple of racehorses, and he just said, Guy, it is stressful. It is very expensive, very stressful. You can make money. I think he actually did make some money from it, but he said, goodness, it's certainly not something you can really be passive in. So not financial advice, but horses are a tricky one. Anyhow, let's move on. Let's talk about crypto, shall we? People will be tuning in thinking, why are they talking about gold, wine, and horses? What's going on? This is true bear market stuff. Can I also say, just ask people watching, by the way, if you have any questions for Ben, Rob, and myself, please do leave them in the comments. And then if we have some time at the end of the show, we will try and do a few quick fire answers to them as well. Always lovely to get your feedback and your questions. Okay, let's move on though. So, Coinbase, Wells notice. Obviously, yesterday, everyone was getting het up about the Fed and what they were going to do. And then we also got a double whammy. We got dessert, if you like, from the SEC, our friends at the SEC. Coinbase has been hit with a Wells notice. Paxos looks likely to be sued over BUSD. They obviously got a Wells notice about a month ago. So my question is, when we see a regulator behaving like this, and just for a bit of context, Coinbase has come out and said there was a post on the Coinbase blog, sort of saying what had happened, and they said, well, why are they planning to sue us? We don't know. They didn't say. Something very woolly about possible violations of securities laws, but nothing specific, which I think is absolutely incredible. What a way to behave. So when a regulator behaves like this, can we reasonably expect crypto companies to remain in the United States? I mean, how long are they going to put up with this sort of nonsense from regulators who, I would argue, should really know better? But Ben, do you want to lead us off on that?
I mean, I think it's going to have to send some companies overseas. I mean, if you're a crypto company, what are you going to do? I mean, I was reading something that Coinbase put out yesterday, and they said they've tried so hard to work with the SEC and to really get clarity, and they even had a meeting scheduled, and then I think the SEC sort of just blew them off. And I also think they sort of alluded to the idea that there's not necessarily a ton of agreement at the SEC is actually what even is the right way to proceed, which I think is also keeping that clarity from coming. But yeah, I mean, like if you're an entrepreneur and you want to create something in crypto, what are you going to do? Like just create it in the United States and just hope they don't come after you in a few months or a year, or do you just create it somewhere else? And
Yeah.
I think the path of least resistance, at least for right now, and it's unfortunate, and we talked about this a year ago, right? It's unfortunate, but the path of least resistance right now is, of course, to just go somewhere else and start it. I sincerely hope that they figure things out before too long, because if they don't, then I think it's just going to set the USA back, years at least in terms of innovation. Because I am fairly confident that crypto will play a very important role in our future. I just think we're going through some growing pains right now, and those pains are likely going to continue for the duration of this year. But I do think crypto is the future, and if it cannot be invested in right now within the United States, then it's just going to send people elsewhere. And I think we're going to get somewhat behind the curve, and it could be a decision that they regret. So, yeah, I mean, the short answer to your question is we can't reasonably expect crypto companies to remain in the United States if you just simply don't know if you're going to be served a Wells notice, if you're going to be sued by the you just don't know. And who wants to take on that risk? So yeah, I think innovation is likely more so heading overseas. It could come back if we get some type of regulatory clarity, but until that comes, I mean, I don't think you're going to see any major new crypto companies starting, because it's also going to be very hard for, I think, them to sort of raise money in such an environment that we're in right now to even really get off the ground. Including regulatory risks, it's more difficult to raise capital right now than it was just a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, hopefully, I'd like to try to stay optimistic on it. I mean, I live in the United States. I would more so love to see the United States get this right. I don't want to see them just sort of like ban everything. And but at the same time, like, I feel like they owe it to investors to give clarity and just move forward, whatever that future looks like. Let's just move forward with it now rather than just waiting around for another 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. And Rob, I think it was you when we were discussing things just before we came on air. I mean, I think it came up that Coinbase, I mean, for goodness sake, these guys are, not only have they been around, I think only Kraken has been around longer, and look what's happened to them. But these guys are regulated. These guys are the most well-known. They have jumped through every hoop, and still the SEC comes after them for unspecified reasons. It's crazy, right?
No, it's just the nature of the beast. This is what's happening. But like a couple let me ask you guys a question. When you were growing up, did you ever get bullied? Like when you were like a kid or something like that? Like there's always somebody bigger and stronger and whatever else, and they bully. I was a fat, chubby kid back in the early days, and I got bullied quite a bit. And then my parents told me, look, that's going to keep happening until you stand up to the bully. And I was like, I don't really want to. But then you do, and the bullies go away. And I said this like 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. I said, look, you're going to have to sue the SEC because they're not going to listen to you, and they're going to pick us off. And then we even talked about this in the beginning. It's like they're picking us off one by one, right? They're not going to approve a Bitcoin ETF. Okay, so Grayscale, what happens to them? Well, they'll just go away. No, they sue the SEC. And then they're going to go to Kraken and go, hey, those the staking, that's a security. Okay, we'll stop. And then, of course, Kraken comes back and is like, well, but we are going to start our own bank here in the United States. And then now they're coming to Coinbase, and what's next? And like there's just this phrase I think about. It's from Benjamin Franklin. We're either going to hang separately, or we'll stick together and hang together. We either hang together, or we will most assuredly will hang separately. So when I see this going on, it's like, this is just one of those things where you're gonna have to stand up with the bully, and you're gonna have to get him. Well, now the mountain comes to Muhammad, as I talked about yesterday, and they're gonna be pulled in. Now I get it, because Coinbase is like, we're just gonna put our head down, and we don't want to deal with it, or we'll deal with it in little ways, but we don't want to actually go against them, because we're worrying about profitability, especially right now with our stock going down so low, and us, like 20% of some of the revenue sources is in staking. They don't want to lose that. So when this happened, they're going to fight the SEC, and it's going to really come down to us, how we support these companies. So like yesterday, I said, okay, well, if they're going to do that, they're going to stand up to them. It's going to take a long time. Look at Ripple and XRP. Look how long that's been going on. So I thought to myself, well, this is going to be one of my dollar cost average buys every day. So yesterday I went to Robinhood and I put in an order to buy $100 of Coinbase stock every single day. And that's how I will try to support them in my own single way. And of course, I use them all the time, and I pay for that Coinbase one. And I think these types of legal actions, it's going to be super expensive, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be long. But I think this is why I'm glad we're all together today, so we can talk about that and go, if you want to support them, just like we saw with the short squeeze with GameStop. What did those guys do? Well, those guys were getting screwed over by a bunch of VCs and different people, and they said, we're enough of this crap. So they all pulled together and they made everybody pay. And that's essentially what I see is going to happen right here. So I'll be talking about this on my channel for the next year and a half to support Coinbase in this way. And that's how I see things going. It's going to be difficult, but it has to be done. There's only one way out of this.
So Coinbase is going to need support from the crypto community, you know, people like us, people, I guess, buying the stock, using the exchange, but I guess as well from the sort of wider crypto industry, because, I mean, we saw a few months ago, I think it was late last year, Coinbase kind of weighed in on Ripple's side in their case against the SEC, didn't they? And there was this sense that the crypto industry was kind of drawing around Ripple, because I think there'd been, you know, I think there's a lot of rivalry in crypto, isn't there? I mean, it's a very competitive space. So, and you know, that means it's necessarily kind of cutthroat. But as you say, Rob, I mean, now is the time to kind of put those quarrels aside, because otherwise they'll pick companies off one by one. So solidarity from the crypto community and from the wider industry as well, I guess, is what's going to get us through this.
I got to agree. And hopefully we can all come together and put aside our petty differences and say, well, if they do this to Coinbase, you know, what's the next one? And they just start picking things off left and right. And just like you've covered on your channel extensively, Choke Point 2.0 is in full effect. So if we don't have our voices heard, then what's going to happen?
Yeah,
Problems.
I'm glad you brought that up, Rob. That had slipped my mind a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because Coinbase is now staring down the barrel of a lengthy court battle, if Ripple's is anything to go by, at a time when there is no doubt about it, a coordinated action to cut the US crypto industry off from the banking sector entirely. So yeah, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of this, but presumably fighting an expensive lawsuit in the United States is going to be even more difficult if you don't have access to banking services, if you can't easily pay your incredibly expensive legal team, who, let's face it, you know, when lawsuits start flying, lawyers are the only ones who really win out in the end. So I wonder if that's going to have an effect. I wonder if that is, if the timing of this is deliberate. It's hard to say, I guess.
Gotta agree. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. And of course, Coinbase has, I guess, another one. I mean, Coinbase is one of these ones that's they've been talking just this week, I think, about setting up a separate offshore exchange. And I think they've obviously seen this coming. And I guess that's another way that they fight. They fight them in the courts, and they fight with their feet, so to speak, and go, okay, well, we're going to go offshore. And I mean, that's a word that has some pretty unpleasant connotations in terms of what's happened in crypto recently. But yeah, I think we are going to see this flight to safety in other more welcoming jurisdictions, of which there are plenty. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time, but surely another interminable lawsuit. I mean, yeah, Ripple's doesn't look like finishing anytime soon. So yeah, it could be tough.
I would say the one thing about Coinbase though, I mean, like I get like standing with them and trying to help them, but like as an investor, they've also I believe a lot of the insiders have been selling their stock actually recently. Like if you go look at sort of some of the statements and stuff, it seems like a lot of them have been selling stock, not buying it. And that's not to say that it can't recover. I mean, I hope that it does. And one day, who knows, right? Like it might, but you know, just be aware that, you know, some of the insiders at the actual exchange, I believe, I'm pretty sure they've been selling stock recently and not buying it.
Can they?
Yeah.
Don't they have to report something to the?
Yeah,
So,
so they are reporting it. That's how I know that. If you go
Uh-huh.
look at the reports, I believe a lot of them have just simply been selling stock recently, probably
Well,
because they knew or they had a feeling that something like this was going to happen, and they knew it wasn't going to really help them make money. I mean, if they get sued for whatever it is, like if they're sued for selling securities or whatever it might be, if they have to delist those securities, and it's going to make their their overall profit go down.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like you think about what happened with XRP, like a couple years ago. Imagine if that happened for like almost every single altcoin. Like what kind of effect that would have on their revenue. I mean, I'm not trying to to sort of scare people, but that's the risk I think that that Coinbase is facing right now is how are they going to make money if they're not even sure what they're allowed to sort of list on the exchange. If they have to delist a lot of trading pairs because they're deemed as securities, and that's going to hit their bottom line. So just something to consider. I mean, I do think it's a good idea for the cryptoverse to sort of band together in this fight. But that is at least something to consider, is that normally when the insiders are selling, I trust what they're doing because they're going to have a better insight into the actual business than anyone else.
Yeah. Well, that's a crappy way to, but I guess it's true. I mean, if you're going to say like if I'm here to support you, you're going to dump on me, then I will just not support you.
Just go look, go double check what I said. I'm pretty sure the reports I was reading was, I don't want to say like definitively, but yeah, go check it out. I think even I'm pretty sure Brian Armstrong just sold a lot of shares too.
Yeah, I saw that that article. Yeah. Something else that's actually on a slightly unrelated note. Something else that's flashed. My DMs were going mad a few minutes ago, so I ducked out to check. Do Kwon has apparently been arrested, which has taken, I guess, long enough. So I haven't had a chance to sort of dig into that, but I saw a few people mention it in the comments as well. So yeah, it's that'll be an interesting one to dig into. Maybe that's something we can talk about next week. But I think he wasn't he supposed to be in Serbia or something like that? I think that was the last I heard. But
surprised they caught
anyhow,
him.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll have a look at that another time. But I thought I'd just break that little story in the stream. Okay, let's move on then. So yeah, obviously uncertain times for crypto in the United States and elsewhere. But let's just go back to some some of the lessons that crypto and Bitcoin perhaps in particular has taught us. So I mean, this is a question that's up for debate, I guess, but a statement that's up for debate. The great lesson of Bitcoin is that fiat money is really just an illusion. Feel free to agree or disagree strongly with that statement. But what other lessons can crypto teach people? And I say especially young people about finance. But I mean, no one is ever too old to learn something new. But I really feel that one of the things that's kind of excited me in recent years is that crypto, and okay, sometimes it's through crappy dog coins or whatever, but crypto does seem to have really engaged a younger generation with the idea of finance, with the idea of how the monetary system works, what it's all about. And for me, initially reading about Bitcoin, 10 years ago when I sort of first discovered it, that really contextualized so much else for me. But Rob, are there what other lessons do you think crypto is good for, is teaching people about finance, about money, about investing in general?
Well, I don't know about you guys, but as when I was growing up in high school, grade school, high school, there was no classes on finance. Like there was no real classes on like the inner workings of how the Federal Reserve works or how everything works as far as like with taxes. I mean, they would talk a little bit about it, but there was nothing really concrete about how money flows, quantitative tightening, Fed rate hikes, and how that affects the economy as far as GDP. There was very little of that. So like one of the interesting things that's happening right now is, I mean, especially right now, is how when banks are failing, people are starting to understand about, fractional reserve banking and going, well, how does that work? Because I thought that my money was my money, and they're figuring out that it's not their money. And I have to tell you, like, it's positive that these things happen so people can understand, and then people can understand where we come from as far as with crypto and digital assets and why it's so important. Unfortunately, there has to be, I hate to say this, but it's true, there has to be more pain, because people's memories are like goldfish, and it's awful. But that happened yesterday, and I think it's going to be all right moving forward. So, like, when we talk about these things, I think it's important. It's great that they understand and they're starting to learn about this stuff, but more pain has to happen before they really get the whole point. And that's also when we covered this a couple of days on the show. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, came out and gave that great speech about how CBDCs were horrible and awful. And I got so many people saying, I'm glad that somebody else says it, because when we talk about it, it's like some weird, crazy conspiracy theory, right? But when the Florida governor comes out and says, we don't want this, and this is why, because we see what happened with the CBDCs, digital yuan, happen in China. So, like, I see it's a positive, but I see there has to be more problems and pain for people to really get the whole idea and why it is, instead of just the narrative of numbers go up. And that's the dangerous thing. And that's why I think most people come into it, and that's where they get trapped.
Yeah. I think people come for the sort of 1000x's, don't they? But I guess they stay for, well, in many cases, they stay for the lessons that it teaches, for the things that it reveals about the financial system that we have at the moment, and how broken that is, especially since the decline of the gold standard and everything like that. Ben, what about you? Has crypto sort of taught you any particular lessons, or did it not really tell you anything that you didn't know before? Or
Oh yeah, it taught me plenty of lessons, especially just about investing in general. You know how we call them? Well, it's a family-friendly show, but let's just say, we call them altcoins. And in general, they can go up a lot in a bull market, a ton. You also see them get wrecked in a bear market as well. But what's interesting is the same stuff, of course, happened 20 years ago. They just called them, and again, I'm using alternative terminology, right? But they called them, altcos, like for companies. Like, there's like alt companies where they're basically just these companies that are just gimmicks and flashy, but they don't actually provide any real value. And a lot of those ultimately go to zero. But if you could have stuck with, just sort of like the blue chips of the industry, that generally trends higher with time. So I think one of the lessons I learned a couple cycles ago, and it was sort of reinforced every cycle since, is just how badly some of these riskier plays can perform in a bear market. And so I do think it one of the things it taught me is that, and this is a common saying, right? Like, the markets essentially take money from impatient people and give it to patient people. I think there's a lot of truth to that, but I also think there's a lot of truth in terms of understanding like what risk you're taking on. I think the biggest issue with the cryptoverse in general is that most people don't really consider what risk there is in any individual project. And then they find themselves, 95% down in a bear market, and then they wonder how they got there. I would say that the cryptoverse kind of wakes you up to that very, very quickly. And I also think that the cryptoverse goes through cycles a lot quicker than some of the other markets. Like it just seems we go from we go from bear market to recovery year, to bull market, and we do it all within just a few years, and it just keeps on occurring. So the cryptoverse is sort of like a no pun intended, but a crash course, I think, in sort of navigating these financial markets. So that's probably what I would say. I mean, obviously it shows you that fiat money, I mean, it essentially goes to zero, right? It's the debasement of fiat money is real. And so we have to figure out ways to protect our purchasing power. But yeah, I think that it's really good to, I think a lot of people get into crypto and then they can pretty quickly learn some lessons with investing that maybe would have taken them, 5 or 10 years to learn in other markets. You can learn it, within a year in the cryptoverse.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, I mean, going back to what Rob was saying, a lot of people, I think, will have learned some pretty tough lessons over the last couple of weeks. The fact that your bank balance, what you think you have, is essentially numbers on a spreadsheet. And if the entity in charge of the spreadsheet goes south, then those numbers, are just that. Just they're not worth the paper they're printed on, so to speak. So yeah, but I think I think that idea that coming to crypto, discovering crypto, that's been one of the, I guess that's why I kind of stayed in crypto, was for what it was able to teach me, just about how finance works, and this idea, especially when it comes to Bitcoin, is this idea of a limited supply, of a maximum supply that they can't go past. And I still think it's fascinating. Did you see Jack Mallers, I think, the other day, explaining this on, was it CNBC or something similar? It seems so obvious to us now, but the lessons of Bitcoin, the lessons, the benefits of a fixed supply, there are still so many people who have yet to learn that. Our work, our work as people who try and educate people about crypto, it hasn't even begun. We're only just getting started, really.
No, it's true. I saw the snippet of it. It's Jack being Jack. He's always informative, and he puts out some good information. But yeah, it's a funny thing. Like even the stuff that has happened with the banks recently, everybody's like, well, of course that happened. Of course, these banks started to collapse because of their poor risk management and getting into T-bills so heavily and just being overexposed. But then of course, before it happens, we're like, no, banks will be fine. It's just amazing how we get to this point, and then we're like, well, of course that happened, but it's always a mystery right beforehand. So it's the same thing that I think will keep happening with the banks as they start to, because I still think we've got some more bank collapses to go. And if that's the case, then that's a pretty good case for crypto and digital assets, and even gold and silver and alternative investments. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, let's finish off with something a little bit more, well, I say a little bit more whimsical, but perhaps that's not being fair. But this is something I think everyone in crypto thinks about from time to time, and I'd love to get your guys' perspective on it. So, imagining you'd bought and hodled a boatload of BTC back when it was pennies, and perhaps you were one of these guys who discovered it early, were able to configure your laptop to mine it back when all it took was a CPU, and you'd amassed a whole stack of Bitcoin and managed to hold on to it, so become, I guess, unimaginably wealthy. What do you think you'd be doing now? Would it have been a blessing or a curse? Rob, do you want to lead us off? Would it have been a good thing or a bad thing, or would it not have changed you at all?
So I had an opportunity to buy 500 Bitcoins for $500. This was in 2012. My son came home and said, hey, I got a kid at school who's got a hard drive worth of these things called Bitcoin, and just give me $500 and I'll get it. And I said, what's Bitcoin? And he explained to me, I go, that makes no sense. And, because when you first started to explain Bitcoin, it's kind of hard. So I will tell you this, even if I would have bought it back then, again, this comes back to the last question about education. Even if I would have bought it back then, I would have just sold it once it doubled, because I'm like, wow, I doubled my money. Because in the stock market, that's a really good year. That's an amazing year to double your money. So I would have done that. But let's just say I held on to it, and I would have, sold it at towards the top and been 100 millionaire. I think, unfortunately, I can give you all the advice in the world about how that'll change you or how it won't change you. But I think people just have to go through those pains to figure out what it is, because power and money, it doesn't change people. It reveals the real person. So I can't really give you any advice on that one. People will find out quite quickly what happens.
Yeah. And Ben, what about you? Would you be on a gold-plated yacht by now, or or doing a similar thing? Which direction do you think you would have gone?
I mean, I think I'd be doing the same stuff. Is my honest answer. I think it's sort of because of crypto that I feel like I just have the luxury to just sit up here and talk about it, day in and day out. and not be doing something else, because before this I was, in a completely different field. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to think I'd be doing the same thing. Obviously, it's hard to know if my path would have, my path might not have been the exact same. Maybe I wouldn't have started a YouTube channel, but it doesn't mean like I wouldn't have been involved. I think I would have been involved in the cryptoverse, but maybe it would have been in a different way. Maybe it would have been more so in like a different type of company or something. But I'd like to think that I'd be doing pretty much the same thing, and not on, as you said, some like gold-plated yacht somewhere.
For what it's worth, Ben, I find it difficult to imagine you on a gold-plated yacht.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to quite strike with the Ben that I know. For my input on it, I must say that I'm glad that's something that didn't happen to me, actually, because that would have meant sort of coming into this unimaginable wealth when I was still in my 20s, albeit my sort of late 20s, maybe even early 30s. And I think that would have been an absolute disaster. I think I would have had an awful lot of fun for maybe a year or however long I'd managed to last. But I think it would have been a curse more than anything else. So yeah, it's difficult to know whether I would have whether I would still be doing what I'm doing now, whether I would have gone down a different path. But I kind of think probably it would have it's just as well that I didn't get in too early. Someone I was talking to about this said, well, don't beat yourself up about missed gains, because the chances are, if you are that sort of person who kind of dwells on that sort of thing, the chances are that you wouldn't have been able to hold on to them. Let's say you'd bought Bitcoin when it was pennies. As soon as it got to $10, $100, whatever it was, you'd have sold out pretty quickly. So yeah, perhaps that sort of person just doesn't exist. Anyhow, how are we doing? We've got a few minutes left, so shall we just have a couple of questions from people?
Of course. Let's see what they got.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, here's one. What's this one say? You guys are awesome. Thanks for all you do. Well, that's not really that's not really a question, isn't it? But thank you, Dylan.
I'll take it.
Okay, here's. I'm happy to answer that and just say thank you very much. Okay, Glenn says, could Bitcoin invalidate the use case for gold and silver, or I guess can they all coexist happily? Rob, what do you think?
I don't see why we can't live together in perfect harmony, quite honestly. I mean, not that it's gonna be perfect, but I don't think you can invalidate it, because again, gold and silver has been around for thousands of years, and there's always going to be people that are going to believe into that hard aspect of gold and silver. And there's advantages and disadvantages, and we talked about that. So I don't think it can truly invalidate and take the entire market cap of gold and silver and just eradicate it and just relegate it to just worthless shrubbery or something. I think it can be together. And again, I don't understand why the gold and silver bugs fight with us, because we should all be on the same side. We want the same thing.
Yeah. Ben, how about you?
Yeah, I think they can coexist. I don't think that Bitcoin invalidates the use case of gold and silver at all.
Yeah. Agreed. Thank you, Glenn. Okay, let's have a look. Here is another question. This is from Sean. Crypto has taught me to verify value, form a plan, and hold assets based on risk. All very wise. I've learned a ton from Ben. For this, I'm grateful. Thank you, Ben. Sorry, that's another not a question, but I thought Ben would like to see that.
I do appreciate that. I often see negative comments, so it's nice to see a nice positive one every once in a while.
Plenty of positive ones to choose from. What about this one from 0 June? Do you think bull market will start till the end of the year, having in mind halving happening April next year? The sort of classic, the oft asked question, when bull market? we've talked about this a few times before, and I should say, obviously, everyone watching and waiting for an answer on that, the best we can make is an educated guess when it comes to this, because no one really knows. But Rob, what would be your best educated guess on this?
I mean, I sure hope so. But even if it doesn't, like, I think the majority of people that are here right now in this crappy market, let's be honest, I think they're ready to be here for the long haul. And if we don't hit it in 2024, and they say, well, that just, so the people who get it are like, well, it's inevitable, so I'll be here in 2025. Maybe it doesn't happen then, but we see some gains, and maybe in 2026 we go in parabolic. But regardless, you'll still have little bull runs or little bear market balances, whatever you want to call it, that you can take profits along the way. So I just think if you're here that's one of the lessons I've learned, is that it's not a get rich quick overnight thing. It does take time, even if you have an asset class like crypto.
Yeah. And Ben, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Bitcoin has probably one more scare before the next true bull market that could theoretically take us to new highs. This is what we've at least seen before. Admittedly, maybe it'll be different, but I think if you look at history, especially when we go from, sort of when the Fed reaches the terminal rate, whenever they cut rates, that really signals at least around the beginning of a new bull market. Now, oftentimes right at the pivot, risk assets can sell off because it's normally short-term bearish, because it means that something fundamentally has gone wrong in the economy for the Federal Reserve to want to cut. So when everyone keeps calling for a cut in July, you'd have to think, well, how bad would it have to be for the Fed to want to cut in July when they've already said they're not going to cut this year? So it's sort of one of those things of like being careful what you wish for as to when you want the Fed to actually cut. But yeah, I mean, I think by the end of this year, going into the halving, we should have hopefully some of this behind us. I think that now that we've probably reached the terminal rate, or we're within 25 or 50 basis points of the terminal rate, the only thing next is to figure out, how long does longer mean with higher for longer. And once we get back into more favorable monetary policy, then yeah, I mean, I think that would probably happen before the halving. So I think this person is with their question, I think their time frame is pretty good. Like, you'll probably see one more scare maybe by the third or fourth quarter, and then we should be off into the halving in the next bull market.
Let's see. Okay, time for just a couple more, I think. This is the burning question on everyone's lips. How high is the chlorine content in Rob's pool?
Well,
Rob,
this is a green screen, so there is no pool.
Oh, no, letting light in upon the magic there.
Yeah, but next week I'll have a whole new green screen, so you'll see the original one.
Fantastic! I can't wait. Wow, there's a reason if ever
when it gets to it, when Bitcoin gets 100K, right?
Well, yeah, but I need Zach Prince or Zach King, the magician on YouTube, to pull that off, because it's very hard to jump into greenery.
They haven't figured that out yet. Okay, and final question, which will lead me into a shameless plug. Who is up for a beer in London 10th after the Coin Bureau event, which, as you can see, is advertised? That really is shameless. I apologize, gentlemen. I apologize, everyone watching. But yeah, I hope people will be able to join us. Those of us who are in London for a beer afterwards. 10th of June, London, De Vere Grand Connaught Rooms, very near Holborn, so lovely central London. So looking forward to joining. Looking forward to seeing people there, I hope. Live.coinbureau.com is the place you can get tickets. Anyhow, apologies for that. So that takes us to pretty much bang on the hour. So Rob, Ben, thank you so much for today. Whose channel are we on next week?
Should be my channel next week.
We're on Ben. Okay, so we will be on into the cryptoverse next week. I imagine there will have been plenty of developments since then. The drama in crypto will have continued, so there'll be lots for us to talk about. In the meantime, please do make sure, everyone, if you don't follow them already, then to follow Rob at Digital Asset News and Ben at Into the Cryptoverse. They're on YouTube, they're on Twitter. Check them out; they are wonderful. So please do add them to your lists. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you, and see you again same time into the cryptoverse next week.
See you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Okay.